Well, it's iatalatal. My hands iatalatal and shaishko the humultisqui and halkamel the humultistalo and iatalatal, Dr. Paulette Tremblay, and to the knowledge keeper, Mike Mitchell. And thank you to Iat Simon for the invitation. And my hands raised is a Stalo tradition of saying thank you. It also means welcome, and we use this to welcome our visitors. They say when the river was our highway, Istolo, if you directly translate it, it means river. And Shaishkuwet is my traditional name, given to me by father's my father's father, and so my grandfather on my father's side, and it was his mother's name. So if you know that, you'll know that I'm displaced. If you know the name, because here in Stoller territory, we're matrilineal. And just that little bit of knowledge talks about our recent history, right? Of being displaced, not once, but twice. My mother was displaced when she was married. I was displaced when I was married because we're supposed to stay in our mother's uh, traditional territory. And for good reason. Um, the knowledge that we have comes down through the women. The ceremonies belong to the women. When I belong is the wrong word because we carry the knowledge. So the notion of knowledge keepers, the women were the ones that were the head of the household. And our longhouses faced the east, and the head of the household sat across from the main door. And it wasn't about who was the leader or who was in charge. It was all based on our reality pre-contact. So the men were the hunters and warriors. If they carried all the knowledge and one of them was killed, there went our library. Understand? So the history of our people was taught. And it was the oldest daughter of the oldest daughter of the oldest daughter of the oldest daughter who was given all of that knowledge right from birth. The oldest daughter's oldest son was the spokesperson, was trained from birth to speak on behalf of the people. And everybody had a place and everybody had a role. Um, and I was fortunate, even though I'm displaced twice, I was raised by my father's grandmother. All the knowledge that I share is from my father's grandmother, my father's mother, my grandmother. And and I think that's really important message is what Mike Mitchell shared, knowledge keeper Mike Mitchell, that everything we do needs to be grounded in who we are as a people. And Iatalatal, Dr. Paulette, for the presentation, that is amazing, amazing, amazing overview of our reality, right? It is. But I tell you, um, after 35 years of being involved in education, right? In one hand, it's exciting to hear. I have notes everywhere here, but it's exciting to hear that the last couple of years, uh, the notion of structural readiness is front and center. But even more so, because I can tell you that didn't always exist, is the funding that is available. Probably not to the degree that we need it, but the fact that there's funding available is really important. And everything that Dr. Tremblay said is really important. Where are you at in all of that, right? Where are you? And what role do you play? That's really important to know and understand. I I read the chat from Trina, and you said I haven't worked officially in the field of education for 9 months, you know, and that's really important to understand. Where are you in this, and what role can you play? What do you have to put in this? It's really important to know where you are in this. Um, because over the years, the things that I've heard, um, because of all the work that was done, is what's the answer? What's the answer? How can we do this? Whether it was from our chief or was it somebody in the provincial education system, Holitam, we say non-native people, what's the answer? And just that overview that Paulette gave, there's no one answer. And it really important to understand is the diversity of our First Nations throughout Canada. And it's true. What I need here in Chilliwack territory is going to be very different from my home community that has a band school, right? So if you're an administrator for a band school, or like myself, I was an administrator for our Stolo Tribal Council, and I had 17 First Nation communities taking care of their post-secondary. And I had 16 First Nations where I took care of their elementary K to 12, right? And when I was hired, how I was hired is I initially started in right out of university. And if you have a background in education, if you have any kind of education, people wanted you, right? I could have been hired in a number of different areas other than education because the limited people resources in our communities was little to none. And I was the first one in my family, in my community, um, to graduate with a degree against all odds, as it is for a lot of our families and communities, even today, I believe. So I could pick and choose where I could work, and I was offered job after job. But I knew in my mind and my heart that I needed to go home to my home community. And it was my mentor advised me, go to a classroom. Don't go directly to a desk job because they're going to want you because of the shortage. You teach for at least 3 years. At least 3 years you teach in the classroom. So when you do go to a desk job or another job, you have that classroom experience and you understand what students need. And to be honest, I would have stayed at the band school. I would have stayed there. This was my nephews and nieces. This was my family was so proud of me that I was a teacher. My aunt would bring me lunch. You know, it was humbling to no end. The children would look at me But I can tell you as a new teacher, I was scared. they, everything they teach you and doesn't prepare you for walking into a classroom, right? But the minute you walk in the classroom and you realize you have this opportunity to shape the minds of these young people. But First Nations, nothing in the provincial system. The curriculum that we taught in the band school was the province's curriculum, did not reflect who we were. And that was my driving force. And I sat with the elders and I said, how do I do this? If I'm responsible, and we had a non-native principal, how do I do this? And of course, the elders came. And I sat with them and I said, how do I do this? How do I teach about the cedar tree? How do I teach about our longhouses in this setting? And the elder said, don't talk about it, do. So there began my journey. And I did. I brought our children, my students, to a longhouse, and we stayed overnight. So my first message is that it's exactly what Mike Mitchell said. It needs to be grounded in who we are. And our recent history does need to be taught to our own families and to our students. The other thing is it's really exciting because this is a national table, because the work that we've done over the years is local, regional, provincial. I never thought I'd see a national table. So for me, this is really exciting. And is it the right thing to do? And that was a question people would ask me. How do you know this is the right thing to do? We don't. And it's true. I believe we're guided. Each one of you here are meant to be doing what you're doing. And one of the greatest things that will bring people down or a person down is confusion and doubt. You have to be steadfast. Don't let doubt come in. And I made a commitment when after I graduated, that if I can help one student or one family, and I think that's what everyone has, is this desire to make a difference for our families. And to me, this is exciting. It just is. I taught the 3 years in my homeschool. And by the time I left, I had the same grade, same students in grade 1, 2, 2, 3, then 3, 4. And I infused our culture. I was raised with the singing and dancing from my grandmother, which were just stories. Our stories about the mosquito woman. How did mosquitoes come? It was a cannibal woman who would come and steal the children. And at the end, this cannibal lady was burnt, and she, instead of smoke, mosquitoes came. So the lesson was When do the mosquitoes come out the thickest? And it was always at dusk. So I'd ask the children, well, where should you be? You should be at home. And the more recent one is, I would say to the older children especially, is we still have, we called our thuhwea. We still have thuhweas today that are going into our communities that are luring our children away. I did a play. And one of the things that the principal, and it's true for public schools and band schools, you could not get parents in the school. Well, this was my grade 2-3 class, I believe, that we did the Thuhwea story. We enacted a play. Well, that place was filled with parents who wanted to see the story they grew up with. They wanted to see their children acting it out. And the other one was the naming. The elders were translating the English names to Halkamelum, to our language. So taking Simon's name, and we didn't have L's or something, so they would translate Simon's name to Halkamelum. Well, I told them, let's have a little name-giving ceremony, because to make it formal, there was always a ceremony. And I was the first one in my family to join our ceremonies when I was a young girl. And my grandfather bestowed my name on me because I joined our ceremonies. And I thought, well, let's have a little name-giving ceremony in my class. Well, others heard about it and parents heard about it, and they said, I want my child to have a name. My child already has a name. I want that announced. At the end of the day, we had a full school ceremony, and I can tell you it wasn't without the naysayers. Some of the teachers were saying, you can't get the students to sit for 2-3 hours. You can't get them to talk. They don't talk. You're not going to get the support we need, blah, 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 on and on and on. But I can tell you that the library, the school library, was so packed it overflowed outside. And every student received a name in that school, traditional and or translated. So parents are key. So again, looking at what is it that brings parents in? And a reflection of who they are. But I also wanted to say this, understanding where your students are, where your parents are, understanding our reality. And I think that was really important notion. Majority of these young people in my class were my nephews or nieces. And in grade 3-4, I had the principal come down and knock on my door and said, you know, your one student is always, always, always late. You have to deal with it. And I said, okay. And she did. She came in late all the time. But she was bright, bright, bright. She had all her work done. She participated. She helped others. And then the second day he came, he said, have you spoke to your student? I said, no, I haven't. You need to deal with this because other teachers and parents or whoever was complaining. So I said, okay. And I pulled the young student. I said, you have to stay back. and everybody else left. And so I said, what's happening? I said, are you okay? I said, I'm concerned because you're always late. Is there anything I can do? And they were told, I was told, they were not allowed to call me auntie. They had to call me Mrs. Point, right? And if I was there now, I'd say, call me auntie. But back then, I was a brand new teacher in my third year. And she said, Auntie, oh, I mean, Mrs. Point. She said, you know, my mom left my dad, and my dad has to get up at 4 or 5, and he leaves for work. And so I get up early. I get up at 7, and I help my younger brother who was FAS. I help him get dressed because we bath the night before, but I have to get him up, Auntie, and I have to feed him, and then I pack our lunch, and I can get halfway to school and then he'll run away. And then I've got to chase him down. And so I'm getting him to school, and it's always hard, but I don't want my dad to know. Right. And I'm sitting there looking at her going, oh my God. I said, I'm so proud of you. I am. I'm so proud of you. And if I'll see if I can get you any help, but you're doing such a good job. So the principal asked me, did you have this chat? And I said, yes, I did. And I have to tell you, I'm so proud of her. I am. And I shared what she was doing. I said, has more responsibility than in taking care of her younger brother. She's doing more than a lot of moms do. Right? I said, I'm so proud of her. She gets gold stars. But let's see what we can do to support her. So it's so important to know where your students are, where your families are. And real quick, I don't know, I don't have a lot of time. I can only give you these examples, right? When I left my home school, not because I wanted to. I left because my kids are in the public school here in Chilpuyak. And I'm singing and dancing. I was invited to elders conferences with my students because I was singing and created a dance group and doing all these plays and naming ceremonies, going to longhouses. I loved it, right? But my kids are here in the local school district with nothing and facing racism and discrimination to the ninth, right? So I was offered a job in this school district, and I took it, and I worked here for 3 years. So relationship is so, so important. Here working with the local school district, the first thing I needed to do, of course, was develop the relationships, but it took 2 years. And one of the schools was so bad that I was just told bluntly, you're not welcome here. The racism, Oka was happening. And I wanted to start First Nation student groups. And they said, you're not welcome here. And we don't want that. We don't want an Oka here, right? One of the counselors in the high school said, here's one point. She's going to save the Indians. And I was such a new employee and I didn't have a lot of confidence. And I would go, oh my God, and die and want to sink into the floor. But 3 years working there, same thing. He walks down the hall, said, here's Gwen Point, going to save the Indians. And I said, yes, I'm going to save them from you. Right? So I learned about the system. And what's really important is, again, I connected with parents. I started parent groups in 3 of the communities connected to the school district. And to keep this really in a mini Reader's Digest version is I sat in their band offices by myself. Nobody would come, but I kept going. And then finally 1 or 2 would come. By the 3rd year, and every community was so different. One community was working with school district, had programs for parents, and started a little daycare while parents were studying. The other community was drug and alcohol to the nines. One of the moms was found in a dumpster behind a hotel, right? I went to the home, and the sister was raising her children, and the sister couldn't get out of bed. The kids were sitting there. I cleaned up the kitchen. I made soup. I made bannock. I sat with her. I bathed the youngest. And I didn't get home till late. And my husband says, "Dear, I was worried about you." I said, "I'm sorry." This is pre-cell phones. I said, "I'm sorry." I said, "This is what happened." He said, "Dear, you're not a social worker." And I said, "You know what? I'm not. But until we have people supporting our families, I'm doing what I need to do." So by the 3rd year, I collected women from all the communities and brought them to the first BC Women's Conference out of my own pocket and my own money. And when I went to pick up the woman that I knew that was being abused, I knew there was abuse happening, but couldn't do anything, couldn't pinpoint it, couldn't get anything done. She came out to get in the van, my van. I had an 18-passenger van, and I had a class 4 license. And she came out without her suitcase, and I said, "What's going on?" She said, "My husband won't watch your kids unless he's paid." I went, "Oh my Lord." So I went back to the van, and I took my food money for the 2 days. I said, "Give this to him and get your suitcase." And she came. And it took another few years, but she finally left her husband, went back to her home community. Her girls are just amazing young leaders today, women, right? So knowing and connecting to the community is so vital and so important of where they're at. The 3rd parent group, the man, he sat back like this in his chair, right? He was on council, young man, and everybody else was kind of like their heads down and not knowing what to say. And I'm trying to be, I bring a little food and stuff. And finally he said, "How can we be proud of who we are? I don't know nothing about who we are. I don't know my language. I don't know my culture. How can our kids be proud of who they are if I'm not proud of who I am?" And I said, "Well, I said, "I don't know my culture." I said, "Well, it's a good day to learn." And so there we started the language classes, and there we started teaching about cedar bark, about carving, about whatever they were interested in. So at the end of the day, those people are leaders in a community today, teaching about cedar, teaching about carving. So making those real connections to families and communities is so important. But I think what, again, falling on the overview that Dr. Paulette gave, is what I'm trying to say is there's no one answer, and you're part of the answer. You are. And I can tell you from my own experience, I shared with Simon yesterday, is education I went from the school district to working for our tribal council. And I just laugh. It's not funny. It isn't, because I was a one-man show and my office was small. There's the door, there's the wall, there's the wall. And I had a computer, a one-man show, right? And after the third year, I asked my boss, do I get a raise? And he kind of put his head down, and I thought, what's going on here? And he said, have you seen your budget? But it's hard to work in isolation. So that's where this whole notion of what can I do? So I stayed connected to school districts. I stayed connected to First Nations. And in the school districts, I said, they'd say, Gwen, can you teach dancing in my school district? I said, I will if you come teach math in mine. So several school districts is what can I do, what can you do, and what can we do together? So we created, we called it CIAI as Friends Working. And we also created a youth conference. Then we connected with parents. So the themes changed over the years. What is it? The priorities changed over the years. And so again, looking at local, then regional, then of course our provincial table here in British Columbia is called FNESC, FNESC. And it was all First Nation leaders in a majority of we have 201 First Nations, and a majority of them sit at this table. So again, looking, what can we do locally? What can we do regionally? What can we do provincially under language and culture? And don't compromise on culture. Don't. Because I would fight with school districts. They'd say, well, they need literacy. Well, they need math. Well, yes, they need to be proud of who they are. They need to see themselves. So here in BC, it was just mandated this last month that all provincial, in order to graduate, they have to have First Nations English and First Nations Studies to graduate. And that's the work of FNESC, our provincial body. So they have an agreement, tripartite agreement. Your whole notion of structural readiness is exciting. I want to tell you that here in BC, when I was working at the Tribal Council in the 90s, we did everything we did with little and no money. I was one of 3 people in the school district. Then in 94, 95, the ministry said, you cannot spend targeted funding without informed consent of First Nations. What did that mean? I went to school district and said, I have this letter. What does it mean? It means you have to agree before we can spend this money. And I said, okay. And it's supposed to be spent under language, culture, and support services. And they said, can we keep half this year? Because it was mandated. And then the full amount next year. And I went back to my one little room office, met with one other person, and said, no, we need to ask for it all. So when I went back and said, well, how much money is it? For that school district, it was 1.4 million. And I just about fell off my chair. So school districts were receiving that money based on numbers of Aboriginal students. And there was 3 employees. And today there's 20 to 30 employees in the majority of school districts. So it is about local, regional, provincial, and national. It is about being where children are at, where parents are at. It is about teaching our families our recent history. It is about them seeing themselves. And I've been teaching this as well in universities, creating the First Nation Studies courses for social workers initially. But the very first course that I taught with my husband, we coined it everything you wanted to know about Indians but was afraid to ask. And I tell my people, if you stand a white person and an Indian person, who will our people pick? We're trained to pick the white person. If you stand a white lawyer and an Indian lawyer, who will our people pick? We have to hold up our own people. And that was said earlier as well. Be good to one another, take care of one another, support one another. And my grandmother told me, and all our elders tell us, you're not allowed to get tired. You're not allowed to feel sorry for yourself. I tell my staff, keep your eye on the ball. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? And yes, you have to be the dishwasher, the bannock maker, the storyteller, right? But I just want to say thank you for inviting me, and thank to Edith also. Thank you for your good work. And this First Nations Education Administrators Association is another key, is another level of work that's so much needed. Um, I'll end with this: is year after year we were retraining and reteaching administrators because they change. So your training is so important. It is. I'm excited that you're doing that. Thank you, Ging, for inviting me. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Hi, Tip.